Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling instances in Missouri's Ozarks history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. Which locations and what hours of the day or night these recorded stories reach are of interest to us. It was 1,900. As they had for thousands of years, the Ozark Mountains stood peaceful and unconcerned, their ancient ridges hiding secrets in isolated valleys and deep hollows. Sutton's Crossing was a building in Washington County, Missouri, where the Big River carved through limestone bluffs. The people who lived in Irondale, the closest village, never referred to it by that name, but official maps simply identified it as Bridge Number 27. For them, it was the Widowmaker, or, as seen in a number of historical local narratives, the Gateway to Hell. The wooden trestle bridge, which was constructed in 1879 to link mining operations on opposing sides of a particularly deep gorge, was unimpressive in its design. The Big River ran through this tiny valley with exceptional velocity, its dark waters nearly 60 feet below the cliff. In 1875, local geological surveys identified this particular river's unusual acoustics. One surveyor characterized the sound of water flowing over submerged rock formations as a most unusual reverberation, reminiscent of distant voices in heated conversation. The odd mood that appeared to pervade this crossing was what set it apart, not its design. When nearing the bridge, travelers observed an extraordinary silence. The breeze appeared to pause its breath, and birds stopped singing. At least 17 occurrences were reported on or near the structure between 1,888 and 1,901, according to county records. These included abrupt, unexplainable behavioral changes in formerly steady people as well as mysterious disappearances. Thomas Holloway, a mail carrier, was the subject of the first known case. The May 17, 1888 edition of the Irondale Register states that Holloway's horse refused to cross the bridge while he was on his usual route. According to reports, the animal got so upset that it flung its rider and ran away in the direction of the town. After walking the entire distance, Holloway complained to many witnesses about a pressure that followed him home. 3 days later, he quit from his job without giving a reason. According to town records, he moved to Illinois after selling his property at a large loss. No other communication was made. Over the course of 6 weeks in the summer of 1892, 3 distinct episodes took place. Local farmer Ezekiel Morrison, on June 12, reported that just after sunset, as he was crossing the bridge, he had what he called a conversation occurring inside my own head, though I could not make out the words. Morrison, who is generally described as a temperate man who is not prone to exaggeration, was sufficiently disturbed by the experience that he changed his route to market, adding almost 7 miles to his journey in order to avoid Sutton's Crossing. At before 4 a.m. on July 1st, Abigail Waywright, a well-known midwife, was discovered walking close to the eastern entrance to the bridge after returning from a birth in the nearby towns. Mrs. Waywright seemed confused and kept asking whether the voices in the wood had sent for her. After a day's rest, she had no memory of the incident and seemed perplexed when asked about her comments. According to the statement she gave to Sheriff Thomas McCready, Sheriff Doherty's predecessor, the instance of William Dyer, a carpenter hired to fix the bridge's western railing after minor damage from spring flooding, was arguably the most unsettling. In late July 1892, Dyer spent 3 days in a row working at the site. He went back to his Irondale boarding house on the evening of the 3rd day and, as his landlady later stated, sat in perfect silence through the dinner hour, neither eating nor responding to conversation directed at him. The next morning, after finishing his contracted work, he gathered his tools and went back to the bridge. A search team was formed when he did not return that night. In the middle of the bridge, they found Dyer's tools neatly arranged. Before vanishing, a partial pair of footsteps led to the southern railing. William Dyer was never located, even after a thorough search of the river and its environs. There are still 27 unresolved disappearances in Washington County between 1,879 and 1,917, including his case. Local officials put up posters cautioning visitors not to stay on the bridge after these incidents, especially after dark. Despite the lack of an official investigation, rural disappearances were regrettably frequent in the remote Ozarks at the time. A sense of unofficial caution grew among locals. Those who had to cross the bridge said they did so swiftly, frequently with a protective charm or silent prayer. No matter the hour, some refused to cross it by themselves. But it was the Mercer family event in the winter of 1900 that really solidified the bridge's reputation. About a mile from Sutton's Crossing, Jacob Mercer, a well-liked foreman at the neighboring Palmer Lead Mine, lived in a small homestead with his brother Isaiah, wife Elizabeth, and themselves. By all accounts, the Mercers were ordinary in most ways. They were pious, hard-working, and quiet. Having been employed in the mine for almost 15 years, Jacob had established a solid reputation for dependability and stability. 15 years of performance reviews are included in the Palmer Mine personnel file of Jacob Mercer, which is now kept in the company archives at the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis. His supervisor, Harold Whitmore, explicitly stated in the annual review dated February 1900 that Mercer remains the most dependable foreman in our employ, demonstrating sound judgment even in crisis situations. These records consistently characterize him as methodical, even-tempered, and not given to flights of fancy. The Mercers mostly avoided social contact with their neighbors, attending Sunday services at the Irondale Methodist Church but otherwise keeping to themselves. Twice a month, Elizabeth would sell pickled vegetables and preserves in the general shop, while Isaiah would occasionally take odd jobs as a carpenter. Their modest but well-kept property had a barn with 2 milk cows and a group of workhorses, a vegetable garden, and a small orchard of apple trees. In the spring of 1900, Isaiah Mercer had come from Tennessee after his wife Sarah had died of tuberculosis. Isaiah had been deeply impacted by his wife's death, but he was finding comfort in manual labor and family companionship, according to letters that Elizabeth Mercer's sister saved. He was quiet but polite, good with his hands, and had a contemplative manner, according to people who knew him. The Mercer homestead itself was perched on a mild incline, with a view of a little Big River branch. The main house was a simple 2-story building made of limestone and native oak that Jacob had erected in 1885, not long after he and Elizabeth were married. The eastern and southern sides were surrounded by a covered porch that offered views of the ridge in the distance, where Sutton's Crossing could be seen as a dark line against the horizon, as well as the coming road. The Mercer household continued to operate according to its customary schedule as winter arrived in the Ozarks that year, bringing with it unusually severe snowfall. Jacob kept working in the mine, traveling over Sutton's Crossing every morning and evening. Elizabeth took care of the house. Isaiah, who had come from Tennessee the spring before, helped out with maintenance around the house and earned extra money by doing woodworking. The region saw especially severe weather in December 1900, based on U.S. meteorological records. Temperatures stayed regularly below freezing starting on December 7th, with snow accumulations in some places reaching 18 inches, according to the Springfield Weather Bureau station. Travel grew more challenging by the middle of the month, and until things eased, many rural inhabitants were essentially cut off. However, despite the weather, the Palmer Lead Mine remained open. The economic significance of the operation to the region meant that work proceeded unless conditions were absolutely insurmountable. Despite living on the other side of the river yet relatively close to the mine, Jacob Mercer crossed the bridge every day. My attendance records show that he was always there during the early winter months. Jacob Mercer left for work as normal on the 11th of December 1900. With temperatures measured at around 15 degrees Fahrenheit, the morning was clear but extremely chilly. Elizabeth later stated that Jacob left the house at 5:30 a.m., as he usually did, with a lantern to light his way to the bridge. As usual, he anticipated returning soon after 4 p.m., his shift's end. He carried out his responsibilities without incident and departed at the usual hour, according to the mine's attendance record, which is kept in the archives of the Washington County Historical Society. As dusk drew near, several miners noticed him strolling towards Sutton's Crossing. This would be Jacob Mercer's final verified appearance as the man his neighbors and co-workers had known for years. It's still unclear what happened on the bridge that night. Jacob's Crossing was not witnessed by anyone. What is known is that Elizabeth noticed a shift in his behavior when he got home, around 40 minutes later than usual. On January 3, 1901, she made a statement to County Sheriff William Doherty, stating that Jacob seemed distant, as though his thoughts were elsewhere. She attributed this to the extreme weather and exhaustion. More in-depth accounts of that night can be found in Elizabeth's journal, which was found among her belongings after she eventually left the area. Jay returned late today, nearly 5:30. His clothing was covered with more snow than the weather would account for, suggesting he may have fallen or perhaps stood motionless outdoors for some period. When questioned, he explained that he had stopped on the bridge to listen to what he described as the river talking. I suggested he was simply hearing the water moving beneath the ice, but he shook his head and said, "No, it was using words." He took no supper and retired early, claiming exhaustion. Subtle changes in Jacob's conduct were increasingly noticeable during the next few days. The most thorough modern description of these developments can be found in Isaiah Mercer's personal journal, which was found during the ensuing investigation. Entries from December 12th indicate that Jacob started displaying a number of troubling habits, including extended periods of stillness, hunger loss, and most significantly, a new tendency to stay still at windows for extended periods of time, especially after dark. On the 13th of December, Isaiah wrote, "Jay spoke only 12 words today by my count. When addressed directly, he responds after a noticeable delay, as though returning his attention from somewhere distant. E is concerned, but believes it will pass." On the 14th of December, it states, "Found Jay standing at the eastern window at 3 a.m., staring in the direction of the bridge. When I inquired if something troubled him, he replied, 'It's clearer at night. The other sounds don't interfere.' He returned to bed at my urging, but seemed reluctant." On the 15th of December, Isaiah wrote, "Jacob spent 3 hours this evening staring toward the direction of the bridge. When Elizabeth inquired as to his thoughts, he replied only that he was listening to it calling. When pressed further, he would not elaborate." A particularly worrying entry from December 17th reads, "Jay's appetite continues to diminish. He consumed only a few bites at breakfast and nothing at the evening meal. E is increasingly distressed. Of greater concern is that I discovered the back door unlatched this morning, with fresh footprints in the snow leading in the direction of the bridge. The tracks showed no sign of a return journey, yet Jay was in his bed when the household awoke. I can only conclude he walked to the bridge during the night and returned by some other path." The biggest change in behavior happened on December 18th, when Jacob seemed to stop talking altogether. Isaiah's entry from that day's journal states, "Jay has not uttered a single word today." E is concerned, but attributes his silence to exhaustion from work. I am less convinced. There is something in his eyes that suggests not fatigue, but attention, as though he is constantly listening to something beyond our perception. Isaiah noted a troubling development on December 19. Discovered Jay in the barn at midnight, using a piece of charcoal to draw on the wooden wall. The markings resembled mathematical equations, or geometric patterns of great complexity. When I approached, he quickly obscured the markings and returned to the house without acknowledgement of my presence. I examined the wall after his departure, but could make no sense of what remained visible. The configurations seemed to incorporate repeated triangular elements arranged in ways that created a disorienting visual effect. As of December 20th, Jacob was no longer going to work. According to the mine's records, Isaiah brought a message stating that his brother had contracted winter fever. The Palmer Mine's medical log includes a brief note confirming receipt of this message and authorizing a 5-day leave of absence, with the understanding that a doctor's report would be forthcoming if the illness continued past this time. Growing concern is shown in Elizabeth's December 21st journal entry. Jay has now spent 2 days in complete silence. He takes no food unless directly handed to him and then consumes only enough to sustain life. Most troubling is his new habit of closing his eyes and pressing his palms against his ears. when either I or Isaiah attempts to engage him in conversation, as though our voices cause him physical discomfort. Yet I have observed him incline his head toward the walls or windows at times, particularly those facing east toward the bridge, with an expression of intense concentration. On December 22, Dr. Samuel Parkman, the closest doctor from Farmington, was called. In the harsh winter weather, it took about 3 hours to go by horse-drawn buggy from his practice to the Mercer homestead. Dr. Parkman prescribed bed rest and a valerian root tonic for Jacob, who was described in his medical notes, which are kept in the county archives, as physically sound but mentally absent. Patient exhibits no fever or identifiable symptoms of physical distress, but remains unresponsive to verbal stimuli. Pupils react normally to light, pulse, and respiration within acceptable parameters. Diagnosis unclear, possibly nervous exhaustion or early indication of mental deterioration. Additionally, he recommended that Elizabeth and Isaiah keep a close eye on Jacob and send for him if his condition worsened. The doctor's notes include an odd addition. Patient became briefly animated when I mentioned crossing the bridge to reach their property. His only utterance during my examination was, "It waits there still." When questioned about this statement, he returned to his previous unresponsive state. In a letter to a colleague in Street, Louis, written on December 27, 1900, and found among Parkman's passing in 1911, the doctor wrote of his dissatisfaction with, "I confess myself perplexed by Mercer's condition." Physical examination reveals no organic cause for his altered state. Were this an isolated case, I might attribute it to particular psychological pressures, or perhaps an undiagnosed brain fever. However, I am troubled by the similarity between his symptoms and those I observed in Thomas Holloway some 12 years prior, as well as in 3 other patients from the same geographical area over the intervening period. All exhibited this peculiar fixation on Sutton's Crossing and reported auditory phenomena associated with the structure. I begin to wonder whether some environmental factor specific to that location might be responsible, perhaps mineral emanations from the underlying geological formations affecting the nervous system. There was no progress during the holiday time. In his increasingly worried journal entries, Isaiah writes that Jacob now stood on the front porch for hours every night, no matter the weather, looking the direction of Sutton's Crossing. On the 28th of December, Isaiah wrote, "Found Jay's boots caked with mud this morning, though he was in bed when he and I retired last night. He must be walking to the bridge during the night hours. E wishes to secure him in his room after dark. I have advised against this, fearing it may agitate his already disturbed mind." A particularly disturbing entry from December 29th states, "Followed Jay at a distance this evening. He walked directly to the bridge, his path unerring despite the darkness and accumulation of snow. Upon reaching the center of the crossing, he stood motionless for nearly 40 minutes. From my concealed position, some 50 yards distant, I could observe him occasionally nodding, as though in agreement with some unheard statement. At no point did he speak aloud. His return journey was equally deliberate. He seemed entirely unaware of my presence throughout." On the 30th of December, Isaiah wrote, "Jay spent the afternoon attempting to reproduce on paper the patterns I had earlier observed him drawing in the barn. He filled 7 pages with increasingly intricate geometric configurations." When E inquired as to their purpose, he did not respond verbally, but placed his hand on the center of one drawing and closed his eyes as though feeling for vibrations. I later examined these papers in his absence and experienced a peculiar visual discomfort when focusing on certain sections. The arrangements of lines seemed to create an optical effect whereby the flat surface appeared to recede into impossible depths. The New Year's Eve of 1900 marked a sea change. Isaiah's notebook and Elizabeth's later statement both claim that Jacob spoke up at the evening meal. "It's waiting for someone to listen properly. I've been listening wrong. Tomorrow, I'll understand better," Isaiah recorded him saying. Elizabeth's journal offers more background information. Jay spoke for the first time in nearly a fortnight this evening. His voice seemed lower in pitch than formerly, with an unusual cadence to his words. When I expressed relief at hearing him speak again, he looked at me with an expression I found difficult to interpret, something between pity and resignation. He said, "The bridge knows things." It remembers what was there before. Before the wood, before the stone, before us. He would say nothing further on the subject that night. When Elizabeth woke up, there was nobody on Jacob's side of the bed. She claimed that when he did not return in a reasonable amount of time, she grew concerned, even though at first she thought he had gone to use the restroom. Isaiah confirmed that Jacob was not in the house when she woke him up. Both pointed out that Jacob had left in just his nightshirt and boots, leaving behind his bulky coat and gloves, despite the extreme cold temperatures that night were later measured to be 7 degrees below zero. Taking lanterns to light the snow-covered path, the two started straight for Sutton's Crossing. The main enigma in this case is what they said about what they discovered there. When they arrived at the bridge just after 2 a.m., Elizabeth and Isaiah claimed to have seen Jacob standing still in the precise middle of the crossing on January 1st, 1901. Both witnesses reported that he seemed to be conversing, but no other person was in view. According to Elizabeth, her husband was animated in a way I had not observed since early December. His hands moved in explanatory gestures, his head inclined as though listening, yet no other person was present. Jacob turned toward them as they drew closer and called his name. Before he purposefully climbed over the railing, Isaiah and Elizabeth would later describe his look as one of pure peace. In his journal, Isaiah wrote, "His eyes met mine in that moment. What I saw there was not madness or despair, but a terrible clarity, as though he had solved some complex equation and found the answer both inevitable and satisfactory. This would turn out to be my last post." Jacob let go of the railing as Isaiah tried to approach his brother, who was still around 30 feet distant. It was around 60 feet, down to the half-frozen river below. Jacob's body was not found that night, despite quick attempts to find him. According to Elizabeth's account, she and Isaiah looked along the riverbed for almost an hour before the bitter cold compelled them to go back home and call for assistance. A search crew led by Sheriff Dougherty searched the river for 3 days when daylight came. After the incident, Jacob's body was found trapped against fallen timber almost a mile downstream on the 4th of January 1901. Although the coroner's report said that the admission of water into the lungs was preceded by considerable trauma associated with collision upon rocks or ice, drowning was listed as the official cause of death. According to Sheriff Dougherty's official report, which was submitted on the 7th of January 1901, Jacob Mercer died of a mental illness caused by unknown natural causes. Similar instances in the area are mentioned in passing in the paper, but this relationship is not further explained. In the margin, there is a handwritten remark that was presumably added later and says, "Another one at the bridge, 3rd this year." If not for what transpired, this may have remained a tragic, but very simple story of a life cut short by mental degeneration. Deeply troubled by his brother's departure, Isaiah's obsession with Sutton's Crossing grew. Despite the severe winter weather, Elizabeth's account shows that he visited the spot every day, often staying for hours at a time. During this time, Elizabeth's journal entries show growing anxiety over her brother-in-law's mental health. On the 9th of January, she wrote, "I returned from the bridge today with a peculiar light in his eyes. He spoke of patterns in the wood grain of the bridge, supports that echo the configurations beneath. When I inquired as to his meaning, he produced Jay's drawings and indicated certain geometric formations, insisting they corresponded to the natural striations in the bridge timbers and, more disturbingly, to formations in the rock face beneath. It's not coincidence," he said. "Sutton knew. He designed it to resonate." On the 12th of January, I spent the entire day at the bridge, returning after nightfall, chilled to the bone, yet seemingly unaware of his physical discomfort. He brought home splinters of wood from the railing, which he examined under a magnifying glass before arranging in patterns similar to those in Jay's drawings. When I suggested he rest, he replied, "There isn't time. It's already speaking to me, too." On the 15th of January, found I sleepwalking last night. He stood in Jay's former place by the eastern window, swaying slightly, as though keeping time with some inaudible rhythm. When gently awakened, he appeared momentarily confused before stating, "The bridge isn't the cause. It's a symptom." He would not explain further, and has no recollection of the incident this morning. Isaiah presented what he called critical information about the bridge's actual nature to Cornelius Washburn, publisher of the Irondale Register, on the 18th of January 1901. At first, Washburn, who was renowned for his journalistic rigor and suspicious temperament, wrote off Isaiah's statements as the hallucinations of a distraught brother. He did, however, consent to go with Isaiah to the crossing the next day, perhaps in order to collect information for a human interest piece about the catastrophe. A thorough record of this visit can be found in Washburn's personal journal, which his granddaughter gave to the Washington County Historical Society in 1957. He and Isaiah reached the bridge just after noon, according to his entry from the 19th of January 1901. Although it was clear, the temperature was really low. For almost half an hour, the two men stood still, with Isaiah, described by Washburn as coherent but agitated, demanding repeatedly that the editor keep quiet and just listen to the bridge. Washburn's increasing frustration and worry for Isaiah's mental health are documented in his journal. He was about to propose that they go back to town when he videotaped himself witnessing what he called an odd audio event. According to him, the sound of the water flowing beneath suddenly altered in character. Rather than the random patterns of natural movement, there emerged what can only be described as rhythmic undulations, almost like articulated speech, though in no language I could identify. The sensation lasted perhaps 20 seconds before dissipating. According to Washburn, I attempted to dismiss the experience as a trick of acoustics combined with the power of suggestion. Mercer, however, appeared vindicated. "You heard it," he said. "Not clearly yet, but you heard it begin to speak. When I suggested that what we had experienced was merely the result of wind moving through the gorge's unusual configuration, he shook his head with evident disappointment. You need to listen longer. It takes time to attune your perception, Jacob understood, toward the end. Washburn ascribed this experience to his own suggestibility, the gorge's inherent acoustics, and the combined effects of the cold. After hearing Isaiah's theories, he did not bring up this occurrence in the piece that followed, which was published in the Irondale Register on the 22nd of January 1901. Instead, it concentrated on the reaction of the town to Jacob's death and a brief account of the bridge's history of accidents. Under the heading, "Local Man's Tragic End Highlights Bridge Safety Concerns," the report omitted any reference to the peculiar circumstances that surrounded Jacob's actions before he left. It did, meanwhile, have a section stating that local authorities have long recognized Sutton's Crossing as a site requiring caution, with 17 documented accidents occurring there since its construction in 1879, a figure significantly higher than comparable structures in the county. However, Isaiah Mercer grew more and more certain that the bridge itself had some sort of sentience or malicious intelligence. He started gathering information on past events at the crossing by speaking with longtime locals and looking through county records, according to Elizabeth's later testimony. He had gathered a significant amount of evidence by the end of February, 1901, that pointed to trends in odd behavior and unexplained events related to the building. Elizabeth's diary from February 10th states, "I returned from Farmington today with transcripts from the county records." He spread these across the dining table and spent hours organizing them by date and type of incident. The resulting pattern, he claims, shows a clear correlation between phases of the moon and unusual occurrences at the bridge. More disturbing is his insistence that these incidents have increased in both frequency and severity since the bridge's construction, with the most pronounced escalation occurring in the past decade. On the 17th of February, she wrote, "I has begun mapping the locations of all homes in the vicinity from which individuals reported unusual experiences connected to the bridge. He believes there exists a pattern of impact radiating outward from the structure, with the severity of effects diminishing in proportion to distance. Our own home," he notes with evident concern, "falls just within what he terms the primary influence zone." Isaiah reportedly had a thought about the influence of the bridge by the end of February. Elizabeth wrote on February 26th, "I spoke at length this evening about resonance frequencies and their effects on human cognition. While much of his explanation exceeded my understanding, He seems to believe that the particular dimensions of the gorge beneath Sutton's Crossing create unusual acoustic properties that can, under certain conditions, affect the human nervous system. The bridge's design, he suggests, may amplify rather than mitigate these effects. When I inquired whether this was intentional, he replied, "I'm increasingly convinced that Frederick Sutton incorporated specific elements into his design with full awareness of their likely consequences." Isaiah brought his findings to Sheriff Daugherty on March 3, 1901, and asked for an official investigation. This 45-minute encounter was confirmed to have taken place by the sheriff's office visitor record. There was no formal action, and Daugherty subsequently characterized Isaiah as consumed by grief and searching for meaning in a senseless tragedy. More background is provided by Sheriff Daugherty's personal notes, which were found among his belongings when he retired in 1912. Mercer presented a disturbing volume of research regarding Sutton's Crossing. While his interpretations tend toward the fantastic, the underlying data he has compiled is difficult to dismiss entirely. The statistical anomalies associated with the bridge, particularly the clustering of mental disturbances among those living within 1 mile of the structure, warrant consideration. However, official investigation seems unlikely to yield actionable results and may only serve to heighten public anxiety. I have advised Mercer to forward his findings to the State University should he wish them examined by those with appropriate scientific expertise. But what is very remarkable about Isaiah's research is that he found a pattern in the bridge's construction. The engineer who planned Sutton's Crossing, Frederick Sutton, for whom it was named, made a number of odd changes to the standard design when it was being built in 1879, according to county records. These included the use of iron components arranged in patterns that seemed to have no structural use and the unequal spacing of support beams. The bridge's ultimate construction was very different from the original architectural blueprints, which Isaiah found in the county archives. Specific changes to the original design are called for in annotations in Sutton's hand, dated April 1879, including the addition of iron resonators at precise intervals along the underside of the span. These changes were made even though they increased the project's cost by almost 18%, indicating that Sutton thought they were necessary. More importantly, Isaiah discovered proof that Sutton had changed his conduct once the bridge was finished, just like Jacob had. After trying to destroy his own creation, Sutton was admitted to the State Mental Institute in Fulton, according to an item published in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch on the 12th of November, 1879. According to Isaiah's additional research, Sutton had previously developed 6 other bridges between Missouri and Illinois, all of which stayed in service without any unusual incidents. He is quoted in the article as saying, "The bridge speaks with voices that should not exist." According to county records, he was methodical to a fault and possessed of a mathematical precision that ensures structural integrity beyond the common standard. His professional reputation had been impeccable before the Irondale project. Isaiah found that the setting of Sutton's Crossing was what set it apart from his earlier efforts. The unique acoustic characteristics of the gorge's geological formation were unmatched in his previous endeavors. The unusual resonant nature of the ravine was particularly mentioned in a geological survey carried out in 1875, which Sutton would have examined during the design process. The survey suggested that any construction that spans the ravine be built to reduce rather than enhance these natural acoustics. In contrast to this advice, Sutton's design included features that should improve the gorge's acoustic qualities. The inclusion of iron resonators, the irregular spacing of support beams, and the railing's precise height all alluded to intentional manipulation of sound patterns rather than their reduction. With these revelations, Elizabeth Mercer's circumstances worsened. On the 10th of April 1901, she wrote in the pastoral notebook of Reverend Thomas Grayson of the Irondale Methodist Church that she was afraid of Isaiah, but for him. He speaks constantly of vibrations and resonance. He believes Frederick Sutton discovered something about the relationship between certain structures and human consciousness. I fear he is following the same path that claimed Jacob. More background is given in Reverend Grayson's journal. Mrs. Mercer reports that her brother-in-law now spends most nights at the bridge, returning only briefly during daylight hours to transcribe his observations and consume minimal sustenance. He has developed a practice of pressing his ear directly against the wooden planking at the center of the span, remaining in this position for hours regardless of weather conditions. Most concerning is his claim that he can now understand fragments of what it's saying, and his belief that complete comprehension requires complete submission. I have offered to speak with him, but Mrs. Mercer believes he would be unreceptive to pastoral counsel at this stage. Elizabeth's journal documents a very unsettling experience that occurred on April 14. I returned from the bridge before dawn, his clothing soaked despite the clear night. He moved about the house in a state of evident agitation, gathering his research materials and organizing them meticulously. When I inquired as to his activities, he replied, "It's shown me how the patterns connect, not just at the bridge, but everywhere. The world is structured around frequencies we've been trained not to perceive." He then produced a tuning fork from his pocket and struck it against the table edge, holding it near various objects in the room, and nodding as though confirming some private theory. When the fork's vibration faded, he looked at me with an expression of profound sadness and said, "You can't hear it yet. Perhaps that's a mercy." The disappearance of Isaiah Mercer occurred on the 17th of April 1901. The next morning, Elizabeth found his bed had not been slept in and reported his absence to Sheriff Dirty. His detailed notes on the bridge were also missing, according to a search of the site. It turned out that the most reasonable theory that he had visited Sutton's Crossing was accurate. 3.5 months after Jacob had fallen, Isaiah's coat was discovered dangling from the same railing, but unlike his brother, Isaiah's remains were never found. He was never located, even after a thorough search that spanned several miles of the river in both directions. His remains were likely transported far downstream, possibly as far as the Mississippi River, with which the Big River finally unites, by the Rapid River, which was swelled by spring rains, according to the official report. Sheriff Doggard's report on the disappearance, which was written on, includes a unique personal comment. Having now lost 2 men to the same location under similar circumstances, I feel compelled to note my growing concern regarding Sutton's Crossing. While official findings must adhere to rational explanation, I cannot dismiss the statistical improbability of these events occurring by chance. I have therefore ordered additional warning signs posted at both approaches to the bridge and have instructed my deputies to increase patrols of the area, particularly after nightfall. The family home was owned by Elizabeth Mercer until June 1901, when she sold it to James Carrington, her late husband's distant cousin. According to the bill of sale, which is kept in county records, the sale was made for much less than market value, indicating that Elizabeth's main incentive was to leave quickly rather than for money. She moved to Springfield, Missouri, to live with her sister until her death in 1943. As historian Margaret Welch interviewed her sister's relatives in 1965, Elizabeth never again mentioned what had happened with her brother-in-law's disappearance or her husband's departure. Her sister's diary from 1902 contained the lone exception. Lizzie woke screaming again last night. When calmed, she would only say, "Some bridges aren't meant to be crossed." Despite its reputation, Sutton's Crossing was still in use until 1917, when a structural evaluation determined that it was hazardous to continue using. County officials decided to construct a new crossing about half a mile upstream rather than fix the deteriorating facility. After being abandoned, the original bridge finally collapsed in 1924 during a powerful storm. Although the location is challenging to reach because of the rough terrain, its stone foundations can still be seen today. Isaiah Mercer's documentation has never been found again. There is no evidence to substantiate the local rumor that he destroyed his studies prior to his final departure. In his 1947 collection Ozark Shadows, folklorist James Westfall documented an alternate story in which he states that Isaiah's notes were recovered by a trapper in 1908, concealed in a waterproof oilskin bag wedged between rocks close to the bridge's foundation. Westfall's source claimed that the finder instantly burnt the contents since they were so upsetting. Despite its intrigue, this narrative is not well documented today. Known only as Old Man Carver in Westfall's essay, the purported discoverer allegedly passed away in 1911 without giving a thorough description of the materials he claimed to have discovered. But according to an interview with Carver's son in Westfall's research notes, which are kept at the University of Missouri, his father talked about pages of calculations that gave him headaches when he tried to understand them, and drawings that seemed to move when you looked at them directly. The statistical anomaly connected to Sutton's Crossing is what makes this instance more than just a local folklore. According to county records, the fatality rate for people who lived within a mile of the bridge between 1,879 and 1,917 was around 8 times higher than the national average. Furthermore, compared to similar rural areas, psychological disorders recorded in the same area happened far more frequently. All medical incidences reported within its jurisdiction were documented by the Washington County Health Department, which was founded in 1905. From 1,905 to 1,917, doctors recorded 47 cases of what they called nervous disorders among the local population around Sutton's Crossing, according to a retroactive review of these records. Initial reports of auditory phenomena, social disengagement, compulsive geometric pattern watching, and, in 39% of cases, statements of a wish to join with the bridge, as one doctor delicately put it, are all remarkably consistent with the symptoms described. The clustering of mental disturbances in the vicinity of Irondale, particularly among those residing near Sutton's Crossing, represents a statistical anomaly that warrants further investigation. This pattern was observed by Dr. William Harrison, the county health officer from 1908 to 1916, in his annual report of 1912. Harrison suggested that environmental factors, possibly related to mineral deposits or water contamination from mining operations, may be contributing to these cases. Local officials adopted Harrison's theory about mining contamination because they thought it was a more acceptable explanation than those involving the bridge itself. In 1913, the Missouri Department of Mining conducted an informal investigation into the Palmer Lead Mine, where Jacob Mercer had worked. Although they acknowledged that soil tests taken close to the operation had higher than normal levels of lead, their analysis did not find enough evidence to link mining operations to the stated mental health issues of the impacted population. The regional distribution of instances was more instructive. The greatest concentration of cases should be found closest to the mining operation itself, if contamination from mining were the main cause. Rather, the data revealed a distinct clustering around Sutton's Crossing, with frequency decreasing in concentric circles as it moved outward from the bridge. This was exactly the pattern that Isaiah Mercer had found in his studies. The bridge's bleak reputation was further enhanced in 1914 by a particularly unsettling incident. On the evening of June 21st, the summer solstice, a group of about 20 locals gathered near Sutton's Crossing, according to archival photos from the Irondale Register. Each of them claimed to have been attracted by strange noises and had independently reached the bridge just after dusk, according to the accompanying article. None could give a convincing reason for their presence when questioned by Sheriff Michael Collins, who had taken over for Dirty in 1910. The behavior that Collins and his deputies witnessed was the most unsettling. The people who had assembled were said to have stood in utter silence, forming a rough semicircle and facing the middle of the bridge. After standing still for almost 40 minutes, they scattered without speaking. None of them remembered the incident clearly. When questioned the next day, characterizing it as a momentary impulse or a dreamlike episode, 3 of the people in the picture would leave this world in the next 6 months under circumstances strikingly identical to those of Jacob Mercer. For the rest of the summer, Collins stationed deputies at the bridge nightly as a result of this occurrence. Although there were no such meetings during this surveillance time, deputies assigned to this job frequently asked to be reassigned, citing discomfort and difficulty staying vigilant while on the bridge after dark. After just one night of bridge duty, one deputy, James Wilson, resigned, citing the simple reason that he could no longer reside in a county that contained such a place. Permanent warning signs telling people not to linger on the bridge and not to cross after dark were put up at both entrances by local authorities by 1915. Although fewer occurrences were reported as a result of these actions, they were not completely eliminated. Records from the county show that between 1915 and the bridge's final abandonment in 1917. There were 7 more sad departures, and 12 instances of what one doctor called acoustic delusions specific to the location. A structural evaluation conducted in early 1917 revealed considerable degradation in numerous important support beams, leading to the decision to abandon Sutton's Crossing rather than rebuild it. The main justification for building a new crossing upstream, according to the County Commissioner's report from the 12th of March 1917, is the exorbitant cost of repairs. Internal Commissioner communications that have been preserved in county archives, however, indicate that other considerations played a role in this choice, beyond the structural concerns identified in the engineer's report. I believe we must consider the persistent negative associations with the current bridge. Commissioner Thomas Blackwood wrote to his colleagues on the 28th of February 1917 saying, "I believe we must consider the persistent negative associations with the current bridge. The construction of an entirely new crossing, following modern design principles and situated at a different location, would serve both practical needs and the less tangible but equally important purpose of severing connection with the troubling history of the existing structure." It appears that the other commissioners agreed, as the motion to abandon Sutton's Crossing and construct a new bridge was unanimously approved on the 15th of March 1917. That spring, construction on the new building got underway, and it was finished by October. Notably, the design closely followed the accepted engineering standards of the time and did not include any of the oddities found in Sutton's original construction. On the 7th of April 1924, a powerful storm caused the original bridge, which had been allowed to naturally decay, to collapse. The Irondale Register reported witness accounts that the bridge collapsed during an exceptionally strong thunderstorm, accompanied by what one witness described as a sound like metal being torn apart, far louder than mere thunder. The bridge collapsed suddenly, rather than gradually, as if some immense force had pulled it downward from below. Following the collapse, a number of locals noted that the mood around the previous crossing had changed significantly. Whether this was objective reality or just psychological relief after the destruction of a structure long associated with tragedy, Hiram Jenkins, whose farm bordered the eastern approach to the bridge, told the Register, "The air feels lighter somehow. Birds sing in places they wouldn't go near before. It's as though something that was holding its breath for 40 years finally let go." There is no doubt that after the bridge collapsed, the number of recorded instances of odd behavior and psychological disorders in the area sharply decreased. Only 2 occurrences of mental impairment are documented in county health records between 1,924 and 1,930 inches, the same geographic area that had previously seen 8 times the national norm. Ozarks rates went back to being in line with the overall area. Although the site is challenging to reach because of the rough terrain, the stone foundations of Sutton's Crossing may still be seen today. Much of the land has been reclaimed by vegetation, with mature trees now growing where the approaches to the bridge once were. The gorge itself is still rather large, but over the years, silt has partially filled it in, lowering its depth by almost 15 feet. These geological changes have probably changed the auditory characteristics seen in early surveys. However, locals still keep a respectful distance from the location. In the immediate area of the ancient crossing, hunting and fishing, which are common pastimes across the Ozarks, are conspicuously absent. Longtime residents usually divert the topic or give evasive answers about better spots elsewhere when asked about this pattern. There is a lingering uneasiness about the place that few will publicly admit. As part of a larger investigation on the relationship between geography and mental health outcomes, Dr. Eleanor Pritchard of Washington University in Street, Louis performed a retrospective analysis of the statistical anomalies related to Sutton's Crossing in 1963. According to her research, which was published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology, some geological formations may produce infrasound frequencies, which are below the human hearing range, that can still have an impact on brain function. The distinctive gorge formation beneath Sutton's Crossing was expressly mentioned by her as a possible cause of these vibrations. In April 1963, Pritchard's study team went to the location of the collapsed bridge. Unusual acoustic characteristics in the gorge were captured by their equipment, such as standing wave patterns that produced nodes of noticeably enhanced sound at specific locations, one of which was at the center of the area where the bridge had stood. According to her paper, these acoustic irregularities and the bridge's design may have produced a type of resonance that, after extended exposure, had an impact on the human nervous system. The paper includes a particularly intriguing finding. When test tones of precisely 18.9 Hz were generated at the site, our team experienced a range of subjective effects, including unease, mild disorientation, and, in 2 cases, auditory hallucinations, described as whispering voices. These effects dissipated immediately upon cessation of the tone. This frequency appears uniquely amplified by the gorge's configuration and may have been further enhanced by the specific dimensions of the original bridge structure. In scholarly circles, Pritchard's research is still debatable. The inability to replicate the original conditions of the intact bridge and methodological limitations are cited by critics. According to reports, her study papers and recordings were lost during a 1968 storage facility rearrangement, but they were preserved at Washington University. The results of attempts to duplicate her findings using contemporary technology have been mixed, with some researchers detecting no odd sounds and others discovering similar sonic anomalies. After her first study, Dr. Pritchard herself refused to do any more research at the location. In a September 1963 letter to a colleague, she stated, "While the data collected at Sutton's Crossing suggests fertile ground for continued investigation, I find myself reluctant to return to the location." This reluctance stems not from scientific skepticism, but its opposite, a growing conviction that some phenomena, once identified, are better left unexamined. The patterns we've begun to discern may lead in directions incompatible with academic objectivity. Unquestionably, this otherwise inconspicuous country crossing has been linked to an unusually high number of incidents. According to county records, there were 23 deaths directly related to the bridge between 1,879 and 1,917, including 6 accidents and 17 cases of people purposefully stepping from the railing. Regular users of the crossing, especially those who used it every day for work, reported an additional 31 cases of nervous problems. The fate of Frederick Sutton, the bridge's namesake, may be the most instructive. His diagnosis following his admission to the Fulton Asylum was acute melancholia with delusional features. According to hospital records, he refused to sleep in rooms with right angles, saying that certain geometric configurations created doorways in the mind. He stayed in the asylum until his death in 1885, allegedly by starvation, after claiming that food had become contaminated with bridge thoughts. Sutton created hundreds of pages of texts and paintings during his 6 years in captivity. These materials showed a compulsive interest in the mathematical connections between sound, structure, and human mind, according to asylum records. The majority of Sutton's asylum writings were destroyed in a fire that damaged the facility's east wing in 1894, but the attending physician, Dr. James Hollister, observed that although Sutton's calculations seemed delusional in content, they showed a coherence and internal consistency, suggesting methodical rather than chaotic thought processes. But 16 pages made it through, saved by Dr. Hollister, who had taken them out for research just before the fire. These pieces, which are being kept at the Missouri State Archives, offer unsettling glimpses into Sutton's thoughts when he was imprisoned. A passage from October 1880 reads, "The bridge was merely a prototype, an experiment to confirm what I had theorized, but could not prove without practical application. The results exceeded my expectations in ways both fascinating and terrible. I now understand that certain configurations of matter can serve as conduits for frequencies typically inaccessible to human perception. The implications extend far beyond civil engineering." Another portion, which appears to be an unopened letter, states, "What we perceive as solid matter is merely organized vibration, maintaining particular patterns through time. By introducing specific counter-vibrations at calculated points, one can create interference patterns that disrupt the conventional relationship between consciousness and physical reality. The bridge demonstrates this principle on a small scale. Larger applications would yield proportionally greater effects. A precise drawing of what looks to be a modified version of Sutton's Crossing, with extra parts not seen in the actual building, is the most unsettling of the surviving documents. This drawing's annotations imply that the enhanced design would amplify the effect by an order of magnitude and potentially establish permanent conduits rather than temporary apertures. The recurring pattern of victim behavior in the Sutton's Crossing case is more unsettling than the actual instances that were reported. In nearly every case for which there are records, people followed the same pattern: initial interest, withdrawal and quiet, and finally, a seeming sense of obligation to visit the bridge at night. Everyone who made it through this last phase claimed to have heard music or voices coming from the building itself. Environmental pollutants and mass panic are examples of contemporary explanations. One potential source of heavy metal contamination that may cause neurological problems is the Palmer Lead Mine, where Jacob Mercer was employed. This argument does not, however, take into consideration the instance's geographic specificity or the fact that they stopped after the bridge was abandoned. The Missouri Department of Natural Resources discovered anomalous amounts of particular minerals in the rock formation near the former bridge site during a geological survey in 1998. When mechanical stress is applied, certain minerals, mainly magnetite, and some rare earth elements can have piezoelectric characteristics, producing electrical charges. According to some experts, the gorge's acoustic characteristics, combined with these minerals, may have produced electromagnetic fields that could have changed brain activity, especially in the temporal lobes involved in auditory processing. Although intriguing, this theory is still theoretical. There hasn't been a thorough investigation of the Sutton's Crossing site using these new techniques, and the technology to accurately measure and map such fields in natural settings has just lately become accessible. Current data may not correctly reflect conditions during the bridge's operational period due to the substantial changes in the landscape over the past century, such as the siltation of the gorge and the natural weathering of the exposed rock sides. Workers discovered an odd relic wedged in one of the remaining foundation stones in 1965 while working on a flood control project close to the original bridge location. The project engineer's report described it as a metal object of indeterminate origin, describing it as cylindrical, about 6 inches long, and covered in markings that looked like mathematical formulae. According to reports, the item vanished while being sent to the University of Missouri for examination. Neither precise sketches nor images were saved. It appeared to be made of some unusual alloy, lighter than steel but with similar hardness, said project supervisor Raymond Thornton in a statement to the Irondale Register, and the surface was covered with intricate engravings, primarily geometric patterns, and what looked like mathematical formulas. Most striking was a series of concentric circles at one end, arranged in a pattern that created an optical illusion of depth. The overall impression was of something designed with extraordinary precision for some specific purpose, though that purpose was not immediately apparent. Thornton added that the object had been found in a cavity that seemed to have been purposefully created within the foundation stone rather than the result of natural weathering or structural failure. This raises concerns regarding its intended use and who may have incorporated it into the bridge's structure because it implies deliberate insertion during construction. There is no mention of include such a thing in Frederick Sutton's design in his extant papers. The lack of proof, however, does not rule out his involvement, because most of his personal and professional records were destroyed when he was committed to the institution. Thornton's depiction of the precision engineering would be in line with Sutton's established technical skills. The location of Sutton's Crossing is mostly forgotten today. Constructed in 1918 and extended in 1956, the new bridge occasionally handles local traffic with no problems to report. The depth of the gorge below has decreased by almost 15 feet due to silt filling it up. These geological changes have probably changed the acoustic characteristics that Dr. Pritchard's team observed in 1963. Even yet, locals continue to stay away from the area after dusk. When asked about it by outsiders, the descendants of people who lived close to the original bridge keep a respectful distance. The Washington County Historical Society polled Irondale and the surrounding area as recently as 1968. And 87% of respondents said the original bridge site was still unwholesome or best left undisturbed. This generational apprehension points to a cultural memory that is more resilient than most rural superstitions. When asked about specifics, older locals frequently cite family tales of the troubles at the bridge, or merely say that some places don't sit right with the natural order. Few will go into further detail beyond these general warnings, especially to those who are seen as strangers. A folklore studies graduate student from the University of Missouri made an effort to record locals' conversations about the bridge's past in 1977. He faced constant opposition, according to his field notes, which are kept at the university library. When Sutton's Crossing was brought up, subjects who had previously talked openly about other local myths and superstitions were conspicuously reserved. He stated, several terminated interviews immediately, while others changed the subject or provided only minimal responses. The impression conveyed was not of ignorance, but deliberate withholding of information. What was the real story behind Sutton's Crossing? Was it just a combination of ambient influences, psychological suggestion, and geological quirks? Is it possible that Frederick Sutton intentionally or accidentally designed a structure that interacted with human awareness in ways that science has not yet completely understood? Like Isaiah Mercer's Corpse and Studies, the answers are lost to time. The Ozark Forest has recovered the fallen bridge's remains, which are gradually deteriorating. The stone foundations serve as silent witnesses to any realities that may be concealed inside the myth of the gateway to hell. According to Elizabeth Mercer, there are maybe some bridges that aren't really meant to be crossed, not literally, but in our perception. After they are solved, some mysteries permanently alter the people who solve them. One such mystery is Sutton's Crossing, a liminal space between the known and the unexplainable that defies easy classification or dismissal amid the deep abysses of the Ozarks, where quiet descends like mist. Locals also claim that when the wind stills down late at night, the gorge still seems to whisper not in the haphazard patterns of natural movement, but rather in rhythmic undulations that, like articulated speech, albeit in a language no one can understand, it's just water over stone, according to some. Some people aren't so sure. And after nightfall, nobody is standing in the middle of the new bridge.